Hello guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another of my videos. Today I'm reading you guys what should be buffed and nerfed of every rare KG in the entire game. Now if you guys enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, the comment for more. And also for rare KGs, I'll be doing every single one or 100 or more, guys. That's going to be what I consider a rare KG in the game, otherwise known as a god KG. But yeah, guys, if you guys don't agree with my opinion, or in case you think other things should be buffed or nerfed, feel free to comment them below, guys. Just be respectful, and I'm sure a lot of people will listen to your opinion. All right, so we're going to be starting off with Sengoku. In my opinion, Sengoku is very bad now that they nerfed the second ability very much. So what I feel to make Sengoku back to where it was, make the second move stun for longer, simply because it is one of the hardest stuns in the game to hit now, simply because it's very easy to block because of the amount of delay on it and the amount of hand size it has. So pretty much they can almost always block before you can use that move. Now, the next fix of Sengoku is to make the first move actually aimable. The first move is almost impossible to actually aim in a fighting scenario, and its range on it is absolutely absurd. That would be something that needs fixed. And the third ability needs to be put on a global cooldown with auto dodges. For some reason, it's not yet, and it should be. Now, next is going to be Raion Akuma. The only change for Raion Akuma, in my opinion, and I feel like it's a very good KG at the moment, but the only change is to make the third move not reduce nearly as much mode as it did before. I feel like the mode rate on it is absolutely insane, and it should drain no mode at all in my personal opinion, and it should not have any chi seal on it. It does enough damage, and it is an iframe, so it doesn't need any of that extra stuff on it. All that stuff is kind of just making the move absolutely ridiculous. Now next up is going to be Light Jokei. The only change for Light Jokei, in my personal opinion, the only change that needs to happen is that there needs to be a slight damage reduction on the C-Spec. A lot of times in competitive, I see people spamming the C-Spec because it is very easy to hit, and it does an absolute metric ton of damage. It is insanely easy to hit and does a ton of damage to the point where, like, there's no reason to really use any other C-Spec besides Light Jokei at the moment, so it needs a slight damage nerf. Next up is going to be Rengoku. Now, in my opinion, Rengoku is at a very bad place right now. The second move needs to have the hitbox fixed on when it pulls people in. It is very buggy, and I feel like the way it pulls people in needs to be changed, because right now it's kind of a place lock stun, where it'll as soon as you cast the move and it happens, they'll just instantly be dragged in with nothing they can do. I feel like it needs to be more like Raion Ren's pull, where it pulls people all around you, rather than just being like a straight line in front of you. I feel like that's a very bad thing to do. The first move needs a slight damage buff, guys. It needs a slight damage buff, simply because you can no longer block breaks anymore. I feel like that is absolutely ridiculous, because the first move, what was the whole point of using the move was the block break. The block break on the first move was the whole point of it, and since they removed it, the first move is almost... It's very difficult to use because the range on it is not very much. So next up is going to be Asura Path on Rengoku. I feel like Asura Path needs to be more auto-tracking than it actually is. Asura Path is one of the single hardest abilities in the game to hit. It's even harder to hit than Odin Saberu, because at least Odin Saberu has somewhat auto-track on it. Asura Path does not auto-track almost whatsoever. It just goes straight to your mouse. I feel like that needs to be changed, and there needs to be auto-track added. Next, I think Animal Spirit needs to have the speed raised by a ton. I feel like Animal Spirit needs the speed raised by an absolute ton to be actually useful. As you guys saw, the speed on it is absolutely atrocious. Next up is going to be Renshiki. To fix Renshiki, my personal opinion is to make the second move do slightly less damage. The second move needs to do slightly less damage. I would say make it do around make it do around 40k instead of doing about 60k. I feel like the damage on it is kind of insane because you don't need the mode anymore, obviously. And then also there needs to be this needs to have less wind up on it. The wind up on the third move is absolutely atrocious. I feel like the move needs to go a lot quicker than it actually does, because the wind up on it makes it almost impossible to hit against anyone actually, playing the game. Next up is going to be Shindai. Now, Shindai, I feel like this was going to be a little bit off, because I feel like the Sunflower should be the old Sunflower where it took a while to actually go up into the air and make the stun go off. I feel like that would actually make it better to use, more skill-based than what it is now, because right now it's practically a free stun, and if they're not actually blocking the Sunflower, and the amount it triggers at actually is very difficult to react to it. But also, if you make a delayed, it'll make a lot of combos possible again. The second move needs to have the hand signs removed. I feel like the hand signs being on the second move makes it almost impossible to actually use, simply because the hand signs were the only reason why the move was so good. I mean, the move is still very usable, but it requires a lot more skill now, and removing hand signs wouldn't really do much besides make the move actually fair. Now, the first move needs to have 2 hand signs added. I feel like Shindai's first move is one of the most, like, one of the most overpowered moves in the entire game. It did have the duration of them nerfed by a lot, but I feel like it actually needs 2 more hand signs to accommodate for the buffs on the meteor that I suggested. Next up would be Raion Ren. I feel like for Raion Ren, the third move needs to have the stun duration increased, because the time they're under the Genjutsu now is barely any time. It is very, very low, and I feel like it needs to be increased by a lot to be actually useful in fights and stuff like that. Now, on the flip side, for Raion Ren's first move, I feel like 1 hand sign needs to be added. For Raion Ren's pull, 1 hand sign needs to be added, and if you do that, and then the clone change I suggested for Shindai, those 2 things would be very, very good together to use. I feel like that would make Raion Ren balanced and good again, simply because the second move was nerfed, and the first move has been nerfed, so only add 1 hand side to the first move, and make the third move stun duration a lot more than it actually is now. Now, for Cobra, I do not actually have Cobra yet, but I do know that Cobra is a very balanced KG overall, besides the M1s. The M1 damage actually needs lowered for Cobra by a bit, simply because the poison makes it so they literally melt. Now, Giovanni Shizen is actually one of the newer ones, such as Cobra. For Giovanni Shizen, I feel like the third move of Giovanni Shizen needs fixed, because it actually crashes my game a lot, and it's actually very difficult to hit in general. I feel like the move is almost impossible to actually hit. I feel like that needs fixed. As you guys know, you like teleport around. I feel like it needs to be a lot more smooth, such as like the dragon. You know, the dragon of like the Kenjutsus. It needs to be more smooth overall, in my personal opinion. And I feel like that would also make it so it doesn't crash. The second move needs the block break removed. The second move, block breaking, is absolutely insane because the stun duration on it is absurd. So pretty much what happens is it'll block break, and when it comes back down as the block break actually ends, they will be stunned for a very long time. So the block break on the second move needs to go. For the first move, the duration of the golem needs to be a little bit longer. I feel like it should last for at least 3 full M1s. I feel like it needs to last for at least 3 full M1s to be an actually very useful ability. But to accommodate for that, you might need to nerf the damage by a little bit. And the only change I actually have for the mode is to make this smaller. Look how massive this thing is, dude. Look how massive this thing is. Look how much vision it actually blocks on my screen. This is absurd how big this is. The size of this needs to get lowered because, like, it's massive. Just make it slightly invisible or make it smaller. Now, for Pika Senko, the only change I can actually think of is to make the first move block break again. I feel like the amount of chi it takes up isn't even very good, simply because it does not block break anymore. It used to block break and teleport you, but it doesn't anymore because they removed that because they thought Pika Senko was going to be too good. But now it is barely used simply because Pika Senko just isn't very good other than the second ability. They already buffed the third ability, so I'm not going to mention that. But the first ability does need the block break re-added. Now, for Mecha Spirit, the only change I can actually think of is that the third move does break your character sometimes. I've heard of glitches where it does break your character if you're using certain modes. But as you guys saw, it worked for me. That's the only change I could actually think of for Mecha Spirit. Because now it is very good because you can use the abilities out of mode, as you clearly saw. Now for Saberu. The first move, the clone move, needs to have hand signs. I don't know why they have never had added hand signs. They removed 1 clone, sure, that's fine, right? Removing 1 clone is very fair. It makes the ability somewhat balanced. But it's a counter. The Odin Saberu clone ability is a counter. That's the most difficult part of it to actually face. Because no hand signs, it's literally, I'm not joking when I say this, it's literally a better forged counter. It's literally a better forged counter. It needs to be changed to have at least 2 hand signs so you can't spam it while you're being comboed by someone. Now for Azim Senko, in my personal opinion, the first ability needs to be put on every single stun global cooldown. Azim Senko's counter is one of the single best counters in the entire game because of all the glitches that have been happening with it recently. You could also do it with every other counter. Every counter that can stun or do a lot of damage needs to be put on the stun global cooldown as well. This is simply because you can spam this move after a stun or things like that, and then use multi-clones, and it will make the move literally one-shot people. So it needs to be on the stun global cooldown, so people cannot stun and then use the move. However, it will still be useful to use against combos if it is on the stun global cooldown. Now for Azim Senko, the second ability has been nerfed a lot. As you guys saw, it did 42,000 damage. that is not nearly enough for being Azim Senko. I feel like that needs buffed to 60k instead of being 42k. Now for the third ability is kind of a teleport. I feel like the damage on it needs to be higher. It does barely any damage, but it is very useful for fighting in general, and the hand size is very low, but it does need to do a little bit more damage. Now for the C-Spec, the C-Spec I feel needs to... It's a very good ability overall, but it needs a slight damage buff to 60k, and after all these changes, Azim Senko will actually be very good to use rather than being bad. Now for hair, I feel like this has been a very difficult thing to face in this game for a while now, but the C-Spec has no end lag. It needs to have end lag added. It is absolutely ridiculous. The C-Spec needs end lag added to be actually fair to fight, especially in duels in the Emperor Arena. The hair C-Spec literally destroys people. It needs end lag added. But to accommodate for the second move and the C-Spec being nerfed, they need to make the first move and the third move do more damage. They need to do a little bit more damage to accommodate for the other moves being nerfed. Now, the first move also knocks people back, which is very against things, and you cannot use it with stuns on the global cooldown. But these moves need a slight damage increase to accommodate for the C-Spec and the second move being nerfed to make hair actually used in fights in general. Now, I feel like Raion Shizen at a very good point in this game, but the only issue I have with Raion Shizen right now, the third move damage needs to be lowered. It does like 40k by trees that are almost impossible to avoid coming out of the ground. I feel like Raion Shizen and Shizen's forest move needs to have a damage nerf. It needs to be nerfed to like 25k instead of doing 40k. That's absolutely insane. The AoE on it is insane. It should not do that much damage because of the utility it has. Now, next up is going to be Tengoku. As you guys know, the Tengoku nerf hit it very hard recently. The C-Spec needs to have more damage added. Right now, the C-Spec does, like, no damage compared to how much it used to. It used to do literally, I'm not even joking, it used to do, like, 4 times the damage it does now. The amount of damage it does is nothing compared to how much it used to. It needs to have a damage increase. Not quite to the point it was before, but you guys nerfed it way too hard. Now, for the first ability, it needs to have a slight damage increase. The amount of damage it does is around, like, 40 to 50k while in mode. So it needs to have a damage increase because Tengoku has no stuns whatsoever, so it has to be comboed with other KGs. A damage increase would make the move very useful. And for the second move, it needs to be taken off the global cooldown. Off the stun global cooldown. It needs to be taken off, and it needs to have the amount of balls lowered. Simply because if you take it off the stun global cooldown, it'll be spammed in combos to one-shot people. So reduce the amount of balls that it actually generates or reduce the damage and make it so it is not on the stun global cooldown, so it's very useful. Now, next up is going to be Seishin. Now, Seishin, in my personal opinion, the C-Spec needs to have the end lag removed. Look at this. I cannot move. I cannot use abilities for the entire time that C-Spec is active. It needs to have the end lag removed simply because the stun isn't even very good. The damage isn't even very good. And that's just the whole point of using Seishin. That's why nobody uses it. The C-Spec is god-awful and needs to have the end lag removed. And for the third ability, it should have the stun amount increased because by the time those bombs actually occur, the stun cancels. So in my personal opinion, they should be stunned for longer, and then the bombs need to affect after. Now, Ink is going to be one of the most major overhauls that I've actually suggested so far. The C-Spec needs to be able to be aimed better, and it needs to be... in my personal opinion, I feel like the C-Spec needs to do more damage overall. The C-Spec does, like, no damage even for being in mode. And the weapon spec of it, you should be able to use weapons while you're on this. You should be able to use abilities and weapons while you're on the Ink weapon spec, just like you can for Minakami 3rd. Now, for the first ability, I feel like the first ability needs to have a damage buff, because right now it is a very good ability to use overall, but the damage of it isn't quite high enough to be useful. And keep in mind, I am in mode right now, so while it may have looked like it did a decent amount of damage, I am in mode. Now, the second ability needs to be taken off the global cooldown. The stun on it is barely any. It's literally like a 0.25 second stun, and it's on the global cooldown for some reason. And it does barely any damage. Now, for the third ability needs to be put on the global cooldown, but it needs to have a damage increase, simply because it does no damage. Now, for Vine, I feel like the first move duration of the move needs to be decreased. It should be decreased by about, like, 1 hit. As you guys saw, it hit him 4 times. I feel like it should only hit 3 times, but the damage should be increased to 15k instead of 12k out of mode. Now for the auto dodge, I feel like the stamina reduction needs to be higher, simply because you do regain stamina as you're using the move, which makes it last for a couple more seconds than it probably should. And if you increase the stamina drain by a little bit, it'll be more fair to face. And for the Vine clones, the damage needs to be increased on the clones. Now, they did have 3 clones re-added, but the damage on them is awful. Look at that. Literally doing 7,000 a hit, while they used to do a lot more than that. The damage needs to be increased. Now, for Dio Senko, the third move needs to have a hand sign added, simply because it has like no hand signs right now. It has 2 hand signs, and it is an instant ability, basically. So it needs to have a hand sign added to be more fair to face overall. Now, the second move of it, which is the jump, only does about 26k out of mode. I feel like it should do 30k out of mode. It needs a slight damage increase to accommodate for all of the changes that have been happening in the game. And the C-Spec, the C-Spec is very good. It does about 60k, but I feel like it should do closer to 70k overall to make it more useful in fights. Because I can guarantee you that almost nobody uses these 2 abilities that I showed you because they don't do quite enough damage. Now, here's everyone's favorite Raion Akuma. Now, I feel like the Chidori of Raion, it does quite a bit of damage. It's about 40k out of mode, but it should stun. It should stun like the other Chidori does, maybe for about 0.5 seconds. It would make the move very useful to use, simply because it'll be actually good if you add a slight stun to it. Now, for the Raion Akuma counter, I feel like the counter is very bad compared to a lot of the other counters in the game. I feel like the stun duration of it needs to be higher, or the damage of it needs to be much higher. Now, for Ashen Storm, I feel like Ashen Storm's third ability needs the end lag removed on it. The end lag on the third move is absolutely ridiculous. I feel like the end lag should be a lot less, if not at all, in the third move. Simply because the other moves of Ashen Storm don't do quite enough. They don't do quite enough justice for the KG in general to be actually useful. But the mode is very good stat-wise. The only change I would say to make for Ashen Storm is to make the third ability have no end lag. Now, those are all of the changes I actually will have suggested for Rel. I actually did suggest a lot of these already. However, the chat message that I sent was pushed up in the chat, in the balance team chat, so I just decided to make a video over it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and if you guys agree with my opinion, be sure to smack that like button, guys. Hope to see you next one. Bye-bye.